take a look at the Middle East, but let's take a look at the facts. The facts are, for 35, I repeat, for 35 years, there has been a harsh, brutal, miserable military occupation. There is a political settlement that has been supported by virtually the entire world, including the Arab states, the PLO, Europe, Eastern Europe, Canada.
Didn't Barack put that on the table?
No, he did not. The Barack proposal in Camp David, in the Barack Clinton proposal, in the United States, you cannot find a map. Here's what you find when you look at a map. 5 cantons, all surrounded by Israeli settlements, infrastructure development, and so on, which also incidentally guarantee Israel control over the water resources. This does not rise to the level of South Africa 40 years ago, when South Africa established the Bantustans. That's the generous, magnanimous offer. Okay. And there's a good reason why maps weren't shown, because as soon as you look at the map, you see it.
Let me just say, Arafat didn't even bother putting a counter-proposal on the table.
That's not true.
The problem that people look at now, the Middle East, is they say it's spun out of control. How do you get back to...
We look at our own position, and we discover what I just described, that for 25 years, the United States has blocked the political settlement, which is supported by the majority of the American population and by the entire world, except for Israel. We take a look at Camp David, and we see, yeah, it was the same. The United States was still demanding a Bantustan-style settlement and rejecting the overwhelming international consensus and the position of the American people. We then discover that the United States immediately moved to enhance terror in the region. So let's continue. On September 29th, Ehud Barak put a massive military presence outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Very provocative. When people came out of the mosque, young people started throwing stones. The Israeli army started shooting. Half a dozen people were killed, and it escalated. The next couple of days, Israel used U.S. helicopters to attack civilian complexes, killing about a dozen people and wounding several dozen. Clinton reacted to that on October 3rd by making the biggest deal in a decade to send Israel new military helicopters. The U.S. press cooperated with that by refusing to publish the story. To this day, they have not published the fact. It continued. When Bush came in, one of his first acts was to send Israel a new shipment of the most advanced military helicopters in the arsenal. That continues right up to a couple of weeks ago with new shipments. On December 14th, the Security Council tried to pass a resolution calling for what everyone recognizes to be the obvious means for reducing terror, namely sending international monitors. The U.S. vetoed it. 10 days before that, there was a meeting at Geneva of the high contracting parties of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which has unanimously held for 35 years that it applies to Israel. The meeting condemned the Israeli settlements as illegal, condemned a list of atrocities, willful destruction of property, murder, trials, torture, and so on and so forth. What happened to that meeting? Oh, I'll tell you what happened to that meeting. The U.S. boycotted it. Therefore, the media refused to publish it. Therefore, no one here knows that the United States once again enhanced terror by refusing to recognize the applicability of conventions which make virtually everything the United States and the Israel are doing there a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions, which means a war crime. The United States is obligated as a high contracting party to prosecute violations of those conventions. That means to prosecute its own leadership for the last 25 years.
Book writers like Bernard Lewis say what went wrong, that in fact there might be a clash of civilizations between an Islamic culture and a Western Judeo-Christian culture. They resent us. There's enormous amounts of hatred, and it goes back in history because of resentment.
Yes, there's hatred against us. Why? In 1958, the U.S. government faced, we know from internal records, 3 major crises in the world. North Africa, Middle East, and Indonesia, all with oil-producing states, all Islamic states. President Eisenhower, in internal discussion, observed to his staff, that I'm quoting it now, there's a campaign of hatred against us in the Middle East, not by governments, but by the people. The National Security Council discussed that question and said yes, and the reason is there's a perception in that region that the United States supports status quo governments which prevent democracy and development, and that we do it because of our interest in Near East oil. Furthermore, it's difficult to counter that perception because it's correct, and furthermore, it ought to be correct. We ought to be supporting brutal and corrupt governments which prevent democracy and development because we want to control Middle East oil. And it's true that leads to a campaign of hatred against us. Now, until Bernard Lewis tells us that, and that's only one piece of a long story, we know that he's just a vulgar propagandist, not a scholar. So yes, as long as we are supporting harsh, brutal governments, blocking democracy and development because of our interest in controlling the oil resources of the region, there will be a campaign of hatred against us.
Tell me, what state does function according to what you call the minimal levels of honesty? Is there a state?
None.
None.
States are power centers. The only thing that imposes constraints on them is either outside force or their own populations. The United States, for example, is far more civilized than it was 40 years ago. Let's just take that. This March happened to be the 40th anniversary of the public announcement by the Kennedy administration that the U.S. Air Force is bombing South Vietnam. No U.S. president today, or for the last 20 years, could conceivably do what Kennedy could do with total impunity 40 years ago. And the reason is because there was massive popular protest. It also spawned the contemporary civil rights movement, the feminist movement, the environmental movements, and all sorts of other things, and it imposed important constraints on straight violence. In fact, that's how we got rid of slavery. That's how we got rid of feudalism.
What will the state look like at the end?
At the end, I think states ought to dissolve, because I think they're illegitimate structures, but that's a long time.
That's it. But it is the end of the nation state that you foresee in the vision.
I don't foresee anything. What I'm saying is that as long as people, ordinary people, are able to free themselves from the doctrinal controls imposed on them by their self-appointed betters and mentors, as long as they're able to do this, they'll continue to be able to struggle for peace and justice and freedom and limitations on violence and constraints on power, as they've been doing for hundreds of years, and I don't see any end to that. The immediate problem is to free ourselves from the shackles imposed very consciously by the kind of people you're talking about, who don't want the facts to be known, and for very good reasons, because if people know the facts, they're not going to tolerate them. So therefore you have to prevent them from knowing. You have to indoctrinate them. You have to tell them stories about how we're really good guys, and if we use violence, it must be for the general good because we represent the course of history. Yeah, that's the job of propagandists for power and violence. And it's the task of populations to free themselves from those kinds of controls and domination.
Pleasure to see you. Always.